Up now.
I'll try to keep it quick because I know we're tired and it's a bit stuffy in here.
Can you speak on the mic, please?
Yeah, can you hear me? I hope that I'm Aussie enough to be accepted into the white man's guild. That'd be nice. I'm 26 and only this year did I realise that I was born and grew up and live in the West, which sounds stupid and ridiculous, but it's true. A Malaysian friend of mine's kept on saying to me, you Westerners and in the West, you Westerners. I said to him, you keep on saying this to me. Do you mean that we're in the West right now? And he looked at me like I was stupid, which is fair enough. My question is, how are you going to win support and get a voice in Parliament and also in, say, popular support, so popular culture, etc. There is a vibrant community on the internet made up of memes and people like that. The alt-right is a motley crew, people like Milo Yiannopoulos, who are banned from coming to Australia now. They actually they connect with young people and their ideas resonate. I would also invite you to think about things like a countercultural festival like Livid this time next year as a fun counter-proposal to the state Vivid program. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so that's a tough question to answer because very few political parties talk about culture anymore. It's mostly about economics, and political parties are generally afraid of talking about culture because the only ones that do, maybe one nation do it, and then you immediately get accused of racism and white supremacy. So it's a tough ask to find a party and a means of coming out and saying, you can't create a political party that says, we want to uphold Western culture and Western civilization. I don't think people would vote for it necessarily, just on that alone. So, look, there's plenty of support out there for Western civilization and whatever you want to call it. I know I just use the term Western civilization because it's easy. Whatever you want to call it, there's plenty of support out there. There's plenty of great people who are working, building memes, and there's YouTube channels, and there's so many characters out there who, especially amongst millennials, who are doing a wonderful job of upholding our cultural values. And I think ultimately we just have to be as honest about what is going on as possible. We have to get out there and say the left, Labour and the Greens want to destroy Western culture. They want to denigrate and obliterate Christianity. They want to, and you really don't need much evidence for this, you can just go, Israel for that. They want to destroy free speech, the Human Rights Commission, Bill Leak, the QUT students, the shutting down of debate in universities. There's so much evidence there, and you just have to lay it out in very simple terms and say, this is what they're doing, and this is their plan. And as I said, it's not difficult to find this on the internet. Put it out there, and let them try and respond to that. Let them try and come along and say, no, we're not trying to destroy Western culture, honestly, It's like, well, what are you trying to do then? Because this is what you've done for the last 40 or 50 years. Our children no longer have any sense of who they are or where they came from or what they belong to. They only know that they're somehow evil and they should apologise and they should kowtow and bow down and learn about Aboriginal dot paintings and wear the Aboriginal flag, which is actually 400 years newer than the Union Jack. It's a flag that was invented after dot painting, actually, in about 1978, and it's there to build this false history idea that Aboriginals are a nation. They never were. They were a bunch of tribes who never laid eyes on each other in most cases. You have to point these things out constantly to normies, as you call them, people who don't sort of go one way or the other, who don't understand. You have to lift the scales from their eyes. They kind of know what's going on. And honestly, it doesn't take much more than a 10 or a 15-minute conversation with them for them to go, well, that's why my kids are being taught that. Oh, that's why my daughter came home crying. Oh, that's why. It honestly, it's not too hard to do it, but to do it through the political forums, I think we need to actually give up on that. I'm not saying don't run for office or don't run for political parties. I think there's better means to do it, but that's a longer conversation because doing this every 3 years is you've got 3 years, and then if you don't win, then you've got another 3. You've got to wait another 3 years and reform and make new tactics, and it's just too long a process. I think there's better ways and better forums to do it.
Okay, we're running late tonight. Now there's time for 2 more questions.
We don't have time for questions. It's 9 o'clock.
Thank you. Now, yourself, who are you asking a question to?
Professor Flint.
Professor Flint, go ahead.
Thank you very much. All the speakers give us a great talk today, and especially Professor Flint. And Professor Flint, you mentioned about the importance of history, especially English history, and if they learned that lesson, they never should went overseas and engage a large land war. So that's kind of a historical tragic. But also that happened in the modern era as well, like the Vietnam War and the Iraq War. But I like to, instead of talking about those mistakes, but there's also something we learned from history and we avoid war, which is the Cold War. Because there's a book called The Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. And during the Cold War, that was a book was widely read by the senior military officers from both sides, the Soviet and the American. So because of that reading, we avoid a war which could destroy humanity. So can you give us some? So if that's the case, then which means it's so important to learn the history, because that's probably the most effective and a free tool to solve our problem of today. But after tonight, I just feel very hopeless, because it's kind of how we can, because it's all coming from the basic education system. And that system itself is controlled by the state, which that's in the modern era, because in the old days, the education was delivered by the religious institution, which that's why they can keep the more less political, and they can taught the real history. Thank you very much.
Well, I agree the teaching of history is absolutely important, and this seems to be one of the things which has been abandoned. They're not teaching history, they're teaching the day of the life of a convict laundress, for example. Something which has nothing to do with learning from history, that is so absolutely important. And I think that the quote about history earlier was so relevant, that man doesn't learn from history, and I think Sir John Glubb had something similar, which was that the thing we know from history is that men do not learn from history. And we've seen that on so many occasions. The wonderful thing in the Cold War about there not being a hot conflict may well have been caused by rational people, including rational communists, realizing that war would lead to their destruction, that there would be mutual destruction. I don't think we can always be assured that an enemy will take that line. I suspect that the present Chinese government obviously, I think, takes that line and is patient and willing to make gains, but I don't think in any way would wish to endanger the situation by directly challenging the United States. But I agree that teaching history is absolutely important. And if our children don't know the history of our country, how can they possibly exercise their rights as citizens? Tonight we've heard that there's something we must do. And I agree with the proposition that leaving decisions to be made in what are essentially, in many ways, confected elections. We know, for example, that pre-selections by both principal parties are pre-arranged. In many respects, they're not open in the same way that the primaries are. One of the wonderful things in the United States was, at least on the Republican side, in the presidential election, at least people were allowed to make the decision, and Trump only emerged. He would not have emerged had it been left to the Republican establishment. He emerged because there were sufficient people who wanted him for some reason. I think what we should be learning is taking into our constitutional system some of the principles of direct democracy. The Prime Minister, the Premier of South Australia wanted to do that at Federation, wasn't allowed to. Deacon said, we can achieve everything by responsible government, but they never thought that we would have this two-party system, that both parties would be controlled by small cabals of power brokers and lobbyists and the like. And we really need to, I think, learn from one republic in particular, and that is the Swiss Republic. We should enable, because I think where common sense lies, it still lies with a goodly number of people, much more than with the politicians. And we should enable, I think, fully enable the population to take decisions away from the politicians when the politicians are being very foolish and making silly decisions. And I think that what we really need is a convention for that purpose.
Okay, look, I think there's time for two quick questions. They won't close the door yet by special arrangement. Now, yourself. Question 2. Who are you asking the question to?
To Professor David Flynn. Thank you, speakers. They were all very scintillating and stimulating points of view. I want to speak about something very shortly that you all probably have touched on, but no one has really skewered. The point that many people who read it in the newspapers, and all of us, have this subject of identity politics thrown around, and not many people can grapple with it sufficiently to understand why certain sectors get so riled up, upset, irritated about what it really means for them. I'll just ask David, and I'll be the shortest one here, what he feels identity politics has bestowed upon us here in Australia, and how much or how many people have got a true grasp of the things that it entails. Please, David.
Identity politics, as I understand it, means that you favour groups in society because of their colour, their sexual preferences, and other matters. And this goes completely against the sense of the sort of democracy we are. People should be treated equally. They shouldn't receive advantages or be allowed considerations because of considerations which are not relevant. We should be treated equally, and I think it's very important that our civilization goes to that.
Sorry, I had an errand I had to perform, so you don't get locked in for the night. That'd be a terrible fate. Last question to who? Yes, sir. And to question 2?
Dr. Chesterfield.
Dr. Chesterfield Evans.
So you spoke about the Middle East for a bit, and I was just wondering what you made of pan-Arab movements, and how you think that, and if you approve of them, how you think that perhaps the next one will come about, sort of dealing with the unnatural colonial borders.
I confess I'm not an expert on pan-Arab movements. I think it is very hard for Humpty Dumpty to put the egg back together again. People have been trying to develop national identities across racial groups with artificially constructed countries, and I think the leaders of Africa and the Middle East have been trying to do that. And of course the traditional ones are pulling the other direction, and then in come the West and scramble it all again. And of course they've then gone to their religions to solve those things. So yeah, how they will succeed and what consensus they can achieve in a very checkered and varied history will be very difficult. But I can't say more than it's not really my expertise, I must confess. I'm just feeling in a sea of conservatives here. And I didn't think of myself as a lefty particularly, but the idea that globalism is a lefty plot, when the captains of capitalism, chief engine of it, seems to me a little hard to swallow. But yeah, I mean, the world is diverse, and people try and put it together, and well, the pan-Arabs or the empire builders or whatever, or even the globalists are trying to have a uniform system, and people wanting their own identity are asserting that against that. But the huge economic forces, I think, that are flowing, with capital flowing freely through technology and through trade, is making the world global by technology, really. I think often technology, and certainly we've had champions of technology today, technology in the end determines history. Technology and economics determine history more than politicians do.
Okay, final word. If you want to join Western Heritage Australia, the forms are on the desk. Take one, sign one. You'll never regret it. We believe in a lot of the things that have been spoken about this evening by one of the best panels we've ever had, and I'd like to invite Jim Sternhill to present the vote of thanks.
I think we'll all agree the standards of speakers tonight are about the highest we've ever had, all comprehensively attacking the subject. I think Jeff pretty well nailed it. On the Western guilt. I think we're basically innocent, but we have a sort of a guilt on the whole thing. One quote which I'm surprised that no one came up with was the one from Voltaire, that a people that can be persuaded to believe in absurdities can equally be persuaded to commit atrocities. And that seems to be where we're all heading, isn't it? And we look at the example there of Mrs. Smith in church. Yes, she has picked up that we're having actually creeping fascism. It's slowly, it's like the Nazis. Yeah, we'd all recognise people goose-dipping in the streets, but of course it didn't start off like that. That's exactly what we're seeing now. We're being divided and conquered with identity politics. We see the snitches, the sort of snitches you'd see in totalitarian regimes, where you dob on the neighbour. That's your social justice warriors, isn't it? How many people in this room feel that, you have to be careful what you say, one of these lefties might dob us in. Come on, try and not have a camera. Hands up to those who think that we're all treading on eggshells with what we say, that we might be offending one of the offendertrons. I think it's quite a large number of people here, and the rest are just too afraid to put their hands up, I think.
Jim, what about being debanked?
Debanked?
Debanked.
Yeah, the banks, the less said about the banks, the better. When it comes to the globalisation that's been behind a lot of that comes from the old United Nations, who I label the United Nazis. and I was even calling them the United Nations on their own Facebook page. The UN, of course, can't be trusted. The only international thing international about the United Nations is the international socialists. For heaven's sake, they've disobeyed their own second part of their charter, and that is not to interfere with national sovereignty by coming up with their global migration compact. And that's something we should all consider, that they need to be taken into account. So we are running a bit low on time, so we've got to all put our hands together for our great panel tonight. We've got Hester Evans, Mr. Jeffrey Shaw, Professor David Flint, and Luke Parisi. Great job, guys.